These are the muscles that act on the neck. The first one is the sternocleidoid mastoid. The origin of this muscle is the manubrium and the clavicle, and the insertion of this muscle is the mastoid process of the temporal bone. The action of this muscle turns the head from side to side. The next muscle is the digastric. Here's the anterior belly of the digastric, and it goes to the posterior belly of the digastric down here. The origin of this muscle is the mastoid process, and the insertion of this muscle is the mandible, and the action of this muscle opens the mouth. The next muscle is the mylohyoid, which is underneath the anterior belly of the digastric. The origin of this muscle is the mandible body, and the insertion is the hyaloid bone. The action of this muscle elevates the floor of the mouth. The next muscle is the styloid, and it's above the posterior portion of the digastric. The insertion of this muscle is the hyaloid bone, and the origin is the styloid process of the temporal bone. The action of this muscle elevates the hyaloid.
These are the muscles at the back. Down at the lowest part, we have, in this crevice, the quadratus lumborum. And the next three muscles that we have are the sacrospinalis. And an easy way to remember the sacrospinalis are going from the outside in and remembering this mnemonic, I love spaghetti. As the outside, I is the iliocostalis. And its origin is the sacrum and the ilium and of the ribs. And its insertion is also along the ribs and the vertebrae. And then the longissimus, is the longest of these three muscles. And its origin is along the vertebrae. And its insertion is also along the vertebrae. And the spaghetti, the innermost muscle, is the spinalis. Its origin is also the vertebrae, and its insertion is also the vertebrae. These three muscles, the iliocostalis, longissimus, and the spinalis, their main function is to extend the spine. Up higher then, we have the scapula muscle. The next muscle that we have is the trapezius. Its origin is the occipital bone and the vertebrae, and its insertion is the clavicle, the spine of the scapula, and also the acromion process. Its action is to elevate the scapula and also to adduct the scapula. The next muscle is the levator scapulae. Its origin is the vertebrae, and its insertion is the superior angle of the scapula. And as the name implies, it elevates the scapula. The next two muscles are similar in action and are right next to each other. They're the rhomboideus major and the rhomboideus minor. The rhomboideus major's insertion is the vertebral scapula. The rhomboideus major's origin is the vertebrae. The rhomboideus major's insertion is the scapula. The rhomboideus minor's origin is also the vertebrae, and its insertion is also the scapula. And they both elevate and adduct the scapula.
I'm going to teach you the muscles of the chest and the abdominal region. First, this is the pectoralis minor. The origin is the ribs, the insertion is the choroid process of the scapula, and the action, it pulls the scapula forward and downward. This is the serratus anterior. The origin is the ribs, the insertion is the vertebral border of the scapula, and the action is it pulls the scapula forward and downward. I'm going to teach you the muscles of the abdominal region. The most superficial layer of the abdominal region is the external abdominal oblique, and that is the muscle that runs downward like this, and it looks like you're putting your hands in your pocket. The origin is the ribs, the insertion is the iliac crest and linea alba, and the action is it compresses the abdomen. The middle layer of the abdominal region is the internal abdominal oblique, and that is the muscle that looks like you're pointing your hands upward, as you can see right here. The origin is the iliac crest, the insertion is the linea alba, and the action is it compresses the abdomen. And then the most deep layer, I have to flip the model over, you can see it runs horizontally like this. This is called the transverse abdominis. The origin is the iliac crest, the insertion is the xiphoid process, and the action is it compresses the abdomen. And then the last part is the rectus abdominis, which runs down the middle here. The origin is the pubic crest, the insertion is the costal cartilage of the ribs, and the action is it flexes the vertebral column. A good way to remember these four muscles is to spell the word tire. So you're going to start with the inside. Transverse abdominis is the T. The internal abdominal oblique is the I. The rectus abdominis is the R. And the external abdominal oblique is the E. So it spells the word tire. The next thing you need to know is the inguinal ligament, which is a ligament that is connecting between the anterior superior iliac spine and the pubic crest. And then you have the linea alba, which is a thick tendon running down the midline of the abdomen.
These are the muscles of the leg. The first one is the tibialis anterior, which runs, its origin is the tibia, and its insertion is the metatarsal. Its action is dorsiflexion and inversion. The next muscle we have is the fibularis tertius, which is the tendon right here, and it runs deep to the extensor digitorum longus, so you cannot see it in this model. Its origin is the fibula, and its insertion is the metatarsal, and it also acts in dorsiflexion and eversion. The next muscle is the fibularis longus, which is this muscle right here, and it fans out right there. You can see the tendon really well. Its origin is the tibia and the fibula, and its insertion is the tarsals and the metatarsals. And its action is plantar flexion and eversion. The next muscle is the fibularis brevis, which runs right here, and you can kind of see it right there. Its origin is the fibula, and its insertion is the metatarsals. It acts in plantar flexion and eversion. We're going to switch to the back of the leg now. This tendon right here is the tendocalcaneus. It is the large tendon that attaches from the calf muscle to the calcaneus. Then you have the gastrocnemius, which has two bellies, right here and right here. Its origin is the condyles of the femur, and its insertion is the calcaneus. It acts in plantar flexion and knee flexion. And then deep to the gastrocnemius is the soleus. You can see it right here. And its origin is the tibia and the fibula, and its insertion is the calcaneus bone again. Its action is plantar flexion.